And we should be judged the same way that we would judge an individual parent as to how well or how poorly they treat their own child. Perhaps the weighty moral responsibility that we undertake when we take a child away from their parents and bring them to ourselves is best expressed by a familiar passage from James Agee's Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, when he wrote, "In every child who is born, no matter what circumstances and of no matter what parents, the potentiality of the human race is born again. And in him too, once more, and for each of us, our terrific responsibility toward human life, toward the utmost idea of goodness, of the horror of error, and of God." So we have talked about why we have a moral obligation to these children. And it's now time to see how well we are doing by them. And I don't know about you all, but for me, I judge a system by only one litmus, not its intentions, but its results. And here's how well you and I are doing. Up to 35% of foster children will end up in prison. When we kick them out to the street to fend for themselves on their 18th birthday, I am not exaggerating, 65% have no place to live. 51% have no job. 40% of all of the homeless people in this country are former foster children who represent 0.3% of the population. Former foster children have higher rates of post-traumatic stress disorder than combat veterans. State law does not guarantee them annual checkups. The current average reimbursement rate that the state of California, in your name and mine, pays to foster parents to take care of these kids, they don't get paid for their time, this is to reimburse them for out-of-pocket expenses, is currently per month less than the average amount that it costs to kennel a dog. Foster family placements are important because they are the most frequent source of adoption and an exit from the system into a loving family. And yet, in no small part because of the reimbursements, which the University of Maryland has said are 61% too low, foster parenting is in a free fall before the economic downturn. 30% decline statewide, 50% in Sacramento County, 61% in San Bernardino County. The dependency lawyers who represent these children in dependency court where every major decision is made, and the social workers who have to investigate and do the legwork to find out how well the kids are doing, their caseloads are grotesque. In this county, the caseloads of dependency lawyers can be up to 300 kids per lawyer. These lawyers frequently do not get a chance to meet their child clients and find out their circumstances until the day of important hearings. They don't have time to be able to enforce existing court orders for sibling visitation and grandparent visitation. It's almost twice the maximum caseload identified by the state's judges themselves. Social worker caseloads are on average between 30 to 55 kids. The recommended maximum is 10 to 15. And the average hearing to decide the fate of these kids is minutes long. I'm not kidding. It's less than the average hearing that you see on Judge Judy. And here's something I just found out about. Sometimes, when these kids act out in ways that at home would earn them a timeout, but in a group home, they go to juvenile hall. Sometimes they sit in jail after their sentences are over because there is no placement available for them. These are our children, and they rot in jail because they have nowhere to go. Everybody who makes decisions about these children in the big building with the dome across the street knows these data. Everybody. What that means is this is being done on purpose. The policies that result in the outcomes I have described to you are as a consequence of considered state policy. And they are being done to your children and mine. Government reports are not known for their passionate diction. But here's how the Little Hoover Commission summed it up in 2003. Quote, children in foster care are routinely denied adequate education and mental and physical health care. For approximately 1 out of 4 children who enter the system each year, foster care is not temporary at all, but a heartless limbo, childhoods squandered by an unaccountable bureaucracy. For a significant number of children, foster care is not healing at all, but inflicts additional trauma on young hearts and minds. In the most severe cases, children are hurt, threatened, and even killed while in the state's care. This stains you, and it stains me, just as surely as if this were being done to our own children. And I will tell you that after nearly 20 years of doing public interest litigation, whether it is environmental law or civil rights law or consumer rights, I will tell you nothing compares to this. Nothing compares to this. This is the wrongest wrong there is. So we talked about the moral sources of our obligations to these children, which are not delegable to others. We talked about how well we're doing. I want to touch briefly on why this is happening. Well, if you were to design a good and moral state from scratch, it is self-evident that these kids would come first in everything that we did, right? They're the only kids, as we said, without grown-ups around to pick up the slack of whatever failures the government incurs. But unfortunately, nothing in my experience so clearly exemplifies the vast difference between the ideal and the real in our politics and government than how these children are treated. Because in the real world, they don't come first. In the real world, they all too often come last. And the reason is depressingly obvious and depressingly simple. They have none of the emblems of power. They can't vote. They're not in a union. They can't give to political campaigns. There aren't that many of them. They can't easily advocate for themselves. Almost everything bad that happens to them happens in secret, and they don't come from where I come from. They don't come from the neighborhoods where I live, and they don't look like me. These data don't just stain you and me. They are also the most poignant, the most painful, and the most starkly drawn indictment of how our politics too often, not always, but too often, responds most eagerly to those who already have stuff as opposed to those who need stuff. So we've talked about the moral sources of our obligation. We've talked about how well or how badly we're doing. We've talked about why this happens. That's all a lot of bad news. I want to leave you with some good news. And it is really good news. The good news is that we're a state of 36 million people, and there are only 80,000 of these kids. You know, at any given time, when you're talking about formal